You ever get blindsided so hard by your own parents that you start questioning your entire childhood? Yeah, that was me 2 months ago. My name's Eli, 31 years old, living in Denver, running a small but successful software firm I built from scratch. No kids, no spouse, just me and my dog, Cooper. Life was quiet, controlled, or at least it was, until I got a text from my dad. Family meeting Sunday, 3 p.m., don't be late. We hadn't had a family meeting since I was like 12. Honestly, I thought someone was dead. So I drove the hour and a half to my parents' house in Boulder, trying not to spiral. When I walked in, my younger brother Mason was already slouched on the couch, half watching a baseball game on mute. He gave me a half nod like I was a neighbor, not his older brother. My parents were sitting at the dining table side by side, folders neatly stacked in front of them. My mom looked like she was about to interview me for a job. My dad had that tight-lipped expression he used to wear when I came home 5 minutes past curfew. I sat. "Thanks for coming," my mom said, smoothing her blouse like this was brunch with a senator. Then my dad slid a paper across the table. I picked it up. And honestly, at first I thought it was a joke. A weird, unfunny boomer-style joke, but it wasn't. It was an invoice, itemized, formatted, with totals, a bill, for raising me. Rent from age 0-18, $43,000, food, $12,800, transportation, $6,200, healthcare, $8,900, general parenting costs, $20,000 grand total, $91,350, I laughed. Not out of humor, out of sheer disbelief. "You're serious?" I asked. My dad nodded like he was confirming I owed the IRS. "Raising a kid costs money," he said. "We gave you a roof over your head, food, education. You've done well for yourself, Eli. It's time to give back." I looked at Mason, expecting some kind of smirk or eye roll. Nothing. He didn't even blink. Just casually took a sip from his Red Bull like this was a Tuesday. My mom added, "And be grateful we're only charging you this much. If we included everything, it would have been double." That's when the switch flipped. My entire childhood came flooding back in jagged pieces, like how I had to get straight A's just to earn a pair of shoes, while Mason got new Jordans because he's on the basketball team. Or when he failed. A history class and they bought him a tutor and a new phone to help him focus. But when I slipped up once, they took my laptop for 2 months. Or the time they told me I could get a car once I'd proven I could handle it. After they bought Mason a brand new SUV for his 17th birthday, and don't even get me started on college. I paid for everything. Tuition, rent, food. I had 3 jobs, barely slept, and still graduated. Mason dropped out of community college twice and still lived at home. Still drove that same SUV. Still didn't pay rent. I stared at the bill in front of me and saw it for what it was. Proof that I had never been seen as a son, just a return on investment. I leaned back in my chair and said quietly, "I'm not paying this." My dad's jaw tightened. My mom's smile twitched. "You're doing well," my dad repeated, as if that meant I owed them something. And that's when I did it. I pulled out my phone, opened a file I'd created over a year ago, something I'd put together more as therapy than anything else. My own invoice, money they'd borrowed from me to cover a temporary emergency with their mortgage, $115,000. The savings account they emptied to help Mason get back on his feet, $42,000. The inheritance from my grandfather that I never saw a cent of, $60,000. Total, $217,000. I turned the screen toward them. Their faces went pale. My mom stared at my phone screen like I'd slapped her. Her lips moved, but no sound came out at first. Then finally she whispered, "Where did you get that number?" I didn't blink. "From my bank statements, my savings, my inheritance, all the money you took and never gave back." My dad scoffed like he was insulted. "That's different," he said, crossing his arms. "We're your parents." "Exactly," I snapped. "You chose to have me, I didn't ask to be born, and now you want to bill me for being a kid?" My mom tried to soften her tone. "We're not saying you owe us for everything, just a small token of appreciation." I leaned forward, resting my arms on the table. "Appreciation isn't measured in dollars, Mom. And if it was, you already owe me more than twice what you're asking." Mason, who had been silent up to this point, let out an exaggerated sigh. "Dude, seriously? Just help them out and move on." I turned to him slowly, like I was seeing him for the first time. "You mean the way I helped them out when I drained my savings for your second failed business? Or when you moved into that apartment and couldn't afford rent, and they borrowed money from me to cover it? That kind of help?" He opened his mouth, then shut it again. My dad stood up. "That's enough. You're not going to guilt us like this." "Oh, the irony," I said, standing too. You invite me here to guilt me into cutting a check for $91,000, and I'm the one crossing the line? We raised you, he said, voice rising. We sacrificed for you. Do you know how much we gave up so you could have opportunities? I gave a humorless laugh. Gave up what? You spent my inheritance. You drained my accounts. You treated me like a backup. Credit card. Mason got your time, your love, and your money. I got lectures and itemized bills. My mom's voice cracked. That's not fair. Yeah, I said, grabbing my jacket. Fair's never really been your thing. I headed toward the door. Just as I reached for the handle, my dad spoke again. If you leave now, he said coldly, you're cutting yourself off from this family. I paused. His voice was so familiar in that moment, like I was 16 again and about to get grounded for questioning their logic. But I wasn't that kid anymore. I looked over my shoulder. You did that already, years ago. Then I walked out. The drive. Home was a blur. I don't remember what I passed or even what music was playing. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles were white. But when I got home and sat down, something snapped inside me. Not in a breakdown way. More like clarity. Like a final puzzle piece clicking into place. I had spent my whole life trying to earn my parents' approval, their love, their acceptance. But it was never unconditional. It was always transactional. I had to be useful, valuable, profitable. Mason never had to earn anything. He simply existed and was rewarded. And now they wanted me to pay for having existed? No, not anymore. I grabbed my laptop and opened a folder I hadn't touched in months. Personal docs. Inside were PDFs, email threads, transaction screenshots, everything. I spent the next 4 hours organizing everything into a single, easy-to-follow document. It wasn't just a petty move, it was a record, a ledger of all the things they had taken. Bank statements showing the $115,000 wire transfer I made to help them save the house. Screenshots of my savings account dropping $42,000 after they begged for a little help for Mason. Emails from my mom saying, we'll pay you back soon, promise. And then, nothing. But the final straw was the inheritance. I had always wondered why I never received anything after my grandfather died. He and I had been close. He had promised to set aside something for me. He said it was his way of making sure I was okay, even if my parents weren't. But when the will was read, I was told he left me nothing. And I believed it, until I got curious one night last year and looked through some old files. That's when I saw it. A line in the will mentioning funds for Eli and Mason equally, to be managed by their parents if recipients are under 25. I had been 23 at the time, and I'd never seen a dime. That night I had emailed my uncle, Grandpa's brother, who had been one of the executors. He never replied. Now I was done waiting. I pulled out my phone, found the old number, and dialed. He picked up on the second ring. Eli, he said, surprised. It's been a long time. Hi, Uncle. James, I have a question about Grandpa's will. There was a pause. I was wondering when this would come up. He finally said. I could feel the air in my apartment shift. You knew? I didn't know everything, he said slowly. But I knew something wasn't right. Your parents told me you agreed to let them manage the funds on your behalf, that it was easier that way. They lied. I figured as much. There was silence for a few beats, then I asked, is there anything I can do? Yes, he said. If you never signed anything giving them legal control, and you have documentation, bank statements, messages, the will, then you might have a case. A case? A legal one. It won't be easy, but it's possible. I hung up and stared at my computer screen. I wasn't even angry anymore. I was done being angry. This was about more than just money. It was about standing up and saying enough. If they wanted to treat family like business, and then business it is. The next morning I called a lawyer. Not just any lawyer. This guy was recommended by a friend who'd gone through a nasty estate battle with her own family. I explained the situation as calmly and clearly as I could, sending over the digital folder I'd assembled the night before. An hour later, he called me back. You have a case, he said, voice clipped and confident. A strong one. Those 4 words sent a chill down my spine. Not because I was afraid, because for the first time someone was validating what I had always felt, but never dared to say out loud. My parents had screwed me over, and it wasn't just emotional. It was financial, documented, legal. I asked what the next steps were, and he laid it all out, filing a claim to dispute mishandling of the inheritance, civil action for the undocumented, transfer of funds, possible restitution. But be prepared, he warned. This won't just be messy, it'll be war. I was ready. For the first few days, I didn't tell anyone. I went to work, walked my dog, lived my life like nothing had changed. But inside, I was drafting battle lines. I was done playing the quiet, obedient son. They wanted to treat me like a bank? Fine. I was sending in the collections department. The papers were filed a week later. And then, silence. No calls, no texts, until the envelope arrived. A formal response from my parents' attorney. They were denying everything, claiming I had willingly gifted the money, that the inheritance had been used for the benefit of the family, that I had never requested repayment and had no grounds to now. It was like reading fiction, offensive fiction, and that's when I knew this wouldn't just be about reclaiming money. This was going to be about exposing them. The week after the documents were served, the phone calls started again. Missed call. Mom. Text from Dad. Please. Don't do this. We can work it out. Voicemail from Mason. Bro, this is insane. You're blowing up the whole family over what? A couple bucks? A couple bucks? They'd stolen nearly 200 grand from me over the years, and now had the audacity to act like I was the one being dramatic. I didn't answer any of them, but I wasn't naive. I knew the storm was coming. It came that Sunday. I had just gotten back from walking Cooper when someone started banging on my apartment door like they were trying to break it down. I opened it, and there stood my mother, hair wild, eyes red, rage and desperation tangled on her face like vines. How could you? She hissed. Your father's blood pressure has been through the roof since we got that notice. I didn't even flinch. Should have thought of that before stealing. From your own son. Her jaw dropped like she couldn't believe I'd said it out loud. We didn't steal, we borrowed. For 8 years? Without my knowledge? Without repayment? Come on, Mom. She pushed past me into the apartment without asking. Cooper growled low in his throat. Oh, please, she said, waving a hand at the dog. Don't act like we're strangers. Right now, I said, shutting the door. You are. She spun around. Eli, this is your family. You don't sue your family. I stared at her. You billed me for being raised. You lost the right to lecture me about family the moment you handed me that invoice. She softened suddenly, her go-to move when brute force didn't work. We were just trying to teach you gratitude. My blood boiled. Gratitude? You drained my savings. You lied about Grandpa's will. And now you're mad that I finally pushed back. Her voice dropped to a whisper. You're going to tear this family apart. No, I said, voice low. You already did that. I'm just done pretending. It's not broken. She left without saying goodbye. 2 days later, my dad showed up at my office. Not my home. My office. He came in like a businessman, not a parent. Sat across from my desk like we were in a negotiation. You don't want this to go to court, he said, his voice calm and cold. It'll get ugly. I leaned back in my chair. It already is. His fingers tapped the armrest. You've got your life now, a good one. Why dredge all this up? Because you took what was mine, I said, and I'm not letting you do it again. He narrowed his eyes. Is this about revenge? No, I said. It's about justice. He stood up. You know Mason needs support. He's not as stable as you. I stood too. Then maybe you should have taught him to stand on his own instead of crippling him with handouts. That was the last time. We spoke in person. A week later, a counteroffer came in. They'd repay $20,000 and call it even. I laughed so hard I nearly choked on my coffee. We didn't even dignify it with a response. By then, my lawyer had uncovered even more. Tax records, undisclosed transfers from Grandpa's estate, even a savings bond that had been intended for me and cashed out under my dad's name. The web was bigger than I'd thought, and so was the betrayal. When the court date was finally set, the tension in the air felt thick enough to choke on. I tried not to think about it constantly, but every notification on my phone, every knock at the door, it all made me tense. My appetite vanished. Sleep came in broken fragments. My dog Cooper picked up on my stress and wouldn't leave my side. I wasn't afraid of losing the case. I was afraid of what else might come crawling out of the cracks when this was all over. And then it happened. 3 days before our first court hearing, my Uncle James called. You're going to want to sit down for this, he said. I was already sitting, but something in his tone made me brace. Your dad had a second account, he said. I blinked. What? James sighed. Back when your grandfather passed, your dad requested access to handle the estate disbursement. The main account was split between you and Mason, yes, but there was also a private account your grandfather kept. Set up in your name only. A trust. My stomach dropped. He created it when you were 10. I guess he knew your parents favored Mason. Maybe he thought it would balance things someday. He deposited into it regularly for years. I couldn't even breathe, James continued. I only just found the paperwork buried in my files. He meant for you to get access to it at 25. I was 31, and let me guess, I said hoarsely, I never saw a cent. No, he confirmed. Your dad emptied it 5 years ago, roughly 60 grand. My heart was pounding. Was that even legal? No, James said. He forged your signature. I've already compared the documents and, Eli, this could turn into something criminal. I sat there stunned. This wasn't just a civil dispute anymore. This was theft, fraud. My entire childhood flashed before me like a cruel joke. The lectures about being grateful, the constant pressure to be independent, the years of being told Mason needed more support, all while my father was actively robbing me behind my back. I had thought they were manipulative, selfish, maybe emotionally abusive, but now I had to face something worse. They were criminals. The morning of the court hearing, I walked into the building not as a son, but as a plaintiff. Mason was there, dressed like he was going to brunch. My mother looked like she hadn't slept in weeks. My dad, well, he looked exactly the same, calm, controlled, like this was just another business meeting. The judge called us in. What followed felt surreal. My lawyer was sharp, concise, and devastatingly thorough. He presented everything: the inheritance, records, the unauthorized withdrawals, the trust documents, and even a forensic handwriting analysis that proved the signature on the trust release form wasn't mine. When the judge saw that piece, her expression shifted, and then came the twist none of us expected. Their lawyer stood up and asked the court for a recess. He approached the bench, whispered something, then left the room with my parents in tow. 10 minutes later, the court clerk handed my lawyer a folder. He opened it, eyebrows raising. Then he passed it to me. Inside was a notarized document signed 4 days ago, a confession from my mother. She admitted that she was the one who forged the signature. She claimed my father didn't know. My brain went static. My mother? The one who'd always played the peacekeeper? The one who cried when I walked out of their house? The one who told me I was tearing the family apart? She forged my name. She stole my future. And she blamed me for breaking the family. The hearing was postponed. The court needed time to verify the confession. My lawyer warned me that this could change the entire direction of the case. If my mother was taking the blame, it might shield my father from criminal liability. But something felt off. I went home and paced for hours. Why would my mom suddenly come forward? Why now? And then it hit me. She was protecting him. Of course she was. It had always been like that. She had always covered for him, rationalized everything he did. When he ignored me, she said he was just stressed. When he punished me unfairly, she said he was trying to prepare me for the real world. Now she was sacrificing herself to keep him clean. And as I sat there stewing in disbelief, my phone lit up. A message from Mason. Hope you're happy. You made Mom cry for 3 days straight. Dad hasn't left the house. You got your stupid revenge. What else do you want? I stared at the screen and something in me cracked. It wasn't rage this time. It wasn't sadness either. It was clarity. They would never change. No matter how much proof I had, no matter what the courts decided, in their eyes, I would always be the villain. I closed the message, blocked his number. Then I opened a new email and typed 2 words. Go public. That evening, a reporter from a local digital news site called me. We had met years ago when I did a small feature on my company. I remembered him being sharp and fair. He'd been following my social media and picked up the scent of something big. I gave him everything. The story, the evidence, even the family photos from happier times to contrast the horror show it had become. I want the truth out there, I said. No spin, no sugarcoating. You sure about this? He asked. I was. Let the world see what happened when blood becomes business. The article dropped on a Thursday morning under the headline, Denver man sues parents after they sent him a bill for raising him, uncovers decade-long financial betrayal. Within hours, it exploded. I didn't expect it to blow up the way it did. I thought it might get a few hundred shares, some local buzz, maybe some TikTok commentary. But by lunchtime, my phone was vibrating nonstop. Mentions, DMs, journalists, podcasts, a segment on a national morning show. Reddit, front page. Twitter, meltdown. Apparently people love a good toxic family story, especially when it comes with spreadsheets and court documents. The court of public opinion moved faster than the legal system ever could. Some called me a hero. Others said I was heartless. But most, Most were just stunned that any parents would dare bill their child for existing, and then steal their inheritance on top of it. I had been prepared for criticism. What I hadn't been prepared for was support. Hundreds of people shared their own stories in the comments, of being used, drained, manipulated by narcissistic parents who wore the mask of martyrdom. People thanked me for speaking up, for standing my ground, for refusing to let guilt silence me. But the story didn't just stay online, it hit my parents like a wrecking ball. By Friday morning, they were bombarded. Neighbors talking, extended family texting. My dad's accounting business got review bombed into oblivion. "Would you like him to forge your signature too?" one Yelp reviewer wrote. Brutal. My mom called first. I didn't pick up. Then came the voicemail. Through sniffles and panic. "Please take the article down, it's ruining our lives, people are calling me a criminal. I can't go to the grocery store." She didn't say, "I'm sorry." She didn't say, "I was wrong." Just that she was embarrassed. Next was Mason. "You sick freak. You had to go nuclear, huh? Mom's losing it, Dad's a wreck. Are you proud of yourself?" "No, Mason, I wasn't proud, but I was free. What came next shocked even me." My lawyer called the next afternoon. "They want to settle," he said. My mouth literally dropped open. "What?" "They're offering full restitution, every dollar from the trust plus interest. And a formal written apology." I didn't know what to say. I had braced myself for a drawn-out war. Years of court dates and character assassinations. "What changed?" I asked. He paused. "Honestly, probably the heat. The story blew up. Their reputations are shredded. They can't afford more exposure, especially your dad." My gut twisted. "What about the forged documents, the fraud?" "That part's up to the DA now. You can press charges or let it go. It's your move." I hung up and just sat there staring at the wall. I had everything I wanted, justice, restitution, even the truth in writing. But I didn't feel relief. I felt hollow. And then just when I thought the storm had passed, a new one hit. That night, I got an email from a burner account. No name, no subject, just one sentence and a photo attachment. "You should know what Mason's been hiding." The photo? A check, scanned clearly, made out to Mason Jacobs. Amount, $60,000. Memo, remaining. Trust funds, final withdrawal. Signed, my dad. Dated 2 years ago. I stared at it for a full minute before it sank in. There hadn't been equal theft. Mason got his half, while I got silence. They had told me Grandpa left me nothing, that there was nothing to split. Meanwhile, Mason had been cashing checks in the background, fully aware. Suddenly everything made sense. Why he was always so smug. Why he always insisted I drop it and let it go. Why he'd been so pissed about the lawsuit. Not because it hurt Mom and Dad, but because it threatened his secret. They all knew. My parents hadn't just lied to me. Mason did too. He had known for years that he got his share. He had watched me struggle, watched me scrape by, watched me drown in student debt and work 3 jobs, and said nothing. That night I sent a single text. "How much did they pay you to stay quiet?" He read it, didn't reply, blocked me. The next morning I forwarded the email and the photo to my lawyer. He didn't even hesitate. "This changes everything," he said. "They can't claim you were treated equally now. And Mason is complicit. We added it to the record. The new court date was rescheduled for a final hearing. A settlement conference. They had offered full payment. But now, I wanted more. Not more money. Not revenge. I wanted the truth on the record. Public, legal, permanent. And I would get it, even if it burned every last bridge I had left. The courtroom was packed, not with press. Thankfully, the judge had limited media attendance, but with quiet eyes, observers, extended family, a few reporters, even some strangers who had read the article and wanted to watch the fallout in real time. My parents sat at the defense table, looking like ghosts of themselves. My mother avoided my gaze. My father stared ahead, jaw clenched like he was trying to control an earthquake inside his chest. Mason didn't come. Coward. The judge took her seat and called us to order. What followed wasn't dramatic, not in the cinematic way. It was clinical, cold, precise. My lawyer presented the final evidence, including the new photo of the check to Mason. "This," he said, "proves that not only did Mr. and Mrs. Jacobs knowingly conceal their son's rightful inheritance, they distributed half of it to the younger sibling, under the pretense that there was nothing to share." He let that hang for a moment. "That's not parenting, that's fraud." Their lawyer didn't even try to argue. The statement was simple. "We accept the findings and wish to resolve this matter in full." Then came the judge's decision. restitution. In full, with interest. Additional damages for emotional distress. A formal letter of apology notarized and filed. Legal fees covered. And lastly, an amended statement to the estate correcting the record of mismanagement and naming Mason as a silent beneficiary of the funds. It was everything I had asked for. But it still wasn't the ending I needed. When the gavel fell, I didn't feel victorious. I felt relieved, not triumphant, just unshackled. After the hearing, I stepped outside into the crisp Denver air, phone buzzing again. I ignored it. Then I saw her, my mom, waiting near the courthouse steps, alone. She looked small, fragile, not like the woman who raised me, but like someone crushed under the weight of consequences. "Eli," she said softly. "I'm sorry." I met her eyes. For what? Getting caught? Her lip trembled. No. For lying. For taking from you. For pretending we were helping when we were really just using. I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask her where this honesty had been when I was 10 and afraid to ask for lunch money. When I was 23, living on instant noodles while Mason took sabbaticals in LA. Instead, I asked one question. Why him? She didn't hesitate. Because he was weaker. Because we thought he'd break. And me? She looked away. Because we knew you wouldn't. That hit harder than any invoice ever could. I nodded once. Well, you were right. And then I walked away. 2 weeks passed. The money hit my account in full, clean, official. With a scanned signature from my father and mother, labeled Final Restitution Payment. My lawyer closed the case. The judge sealed the civil records, but allowed the amended estate records to remain public. Mason never reached out. I didn't expect him to. He kept his half, stayed silent. Let them take mine. That was his choice. But I made mine too. I changed my name. Dropped Jacobs entirely. Went back to the surname my grandfather had before he anglicized it to fit in. The name I'd seen on the original trust. The name he had wanted me to carry forward. I legally became Eli Hartman. No fanfare, no announcement. Just a quiet visit to the DMV and the Social Security office. It felt like shedding a weight I didn't know I'd been carrying since I was Bornisiselbor. A month after the settlement, I got a handwritten letter in the mail from my Uncle James. Eli, your grandfather once told me that strength is not about how much you can carry, but how long you can stand while everyone leans on you. He saw that in you. He told me you'd grow up to break cycles. I think he was right. Don't let this family define you. Build something new. Love, Uncle James. I folded the letter, tucked it into a box with a few other things I still had from my grandfather, an old Polaroid of us fishing, his watch, and a tiny leather coin pouch that still smelled like cigars. That night, I sat on my balcony with Cooper curled up at my feet, staring out at the city lights. The war was over, not won, ended. Some battles aren't about victory. They're about closure and freedom, and choosing to stop bleeding for people who never learned how to stop cutting. So now whenever someone asks if I still talk to my family, I say the truth. I talk to the people I love, and none of them ever sent me a bill for it. That's the end of today's story. Did things turn out the way you thought, or were there some surprises along the way? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear what you think. If you enjoyed this journey, don't forget to hit the like button. And if you haven't joined the community yet, now's the perfect time. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you're always the first to catch new stories. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next adventure.